Welcome back to Module 2 of Testimony 101, Finding Your Story and Communicating. I'm your host, Evan Herrman, and in this module, we're going to talk about your life timeline and what that looks like, what that means, how you can create it, how God can bring healing in things of your past, as well as how to find specific testimonies within your life, the lessons that you learned, and how you can best communicate it with others. A life timeline is something that I've built 3 different times in my life that I've learned from a coaching program I went through called Your One Degree. And I've done it at different intervals in my life. Actually, about every 5 years, I update it and I add to it. And what a life timeline is, it looks at my life essentially from a specific point of time to now. And all the lessons, all the stories that have happened in my life, events, I try to document and remember that were significant and impactful. If it was a positive, if it was a negative, the lessons that I've learned. And I just create my life timeline. And then as I'm looking at it from a 30,000 foot view, realizing, what are some of the themes that I see here? What are some of the lessons that I've consistently learned over and over? What is God teaching me through the arc narrative of my life? And it's very interesting. So I want to show you my personal life timeline. Previously, I had them analog, where I had a large cardboard of white document where I had sticky notes with different colors that resembled different points and chapters and narratives in my life. And after losing one of them, I decided to go digital so I wouldn't lose it, and then I could easily update it as things came back to my remembrance. And so I want to show you my digital timeline. So this is my life timeline, and right here are different headings or chapters in my life. If you go analog, you can do a blue sticky note. This is chapters from 6 to 7, chapters 8 to 14, freshman year through senior year of high school. We have ORU, which is 2006 to 2010, 2010 through 2015, and then I have 2016 through 2022. And these are different stories, lessons, experiences that I've documented. So green is a good experience that I've had. Red is a negative experience. Yellow is a lesson that I've learned with an experience. So green plus yellow is a green experience and a lesson that I learned. So for example, I started playing baseball around this time in my life. I was not good at it, but I enjoyed it. I did apply myself to get better out of desire. I learned what it was like to be driven. And so for me, baseball and my desire to play baseball was a huge motivating factor. And in reality, what's so funny too about baseball is last night, I had a dream of being back in high school, and one of my biggest regrets is I actually quit baseball. That's one of the biggest regrets of my life. I quit. I played my sophomore year. I was injured my junior year, and so I quit, and then I just didn't play my senior year. And I had a dream that I was in my senior year of high school and that I got to play baseball. And then I realized I woke up and I was 36 years old and not going to be able to play baseball. But that was one of my biggest regrets, and I should probably write that on here as well at some point because I don't think I wrote it. But I want to get back to you, the board. All right. So we see up here on the first 6 to 7 year old, a green event. I didn't know it was not normal, but I heard God from an early age when he would talk to me. This was a gift I still have today. So this is an event in my life that keeps showing up. God will speak to me at different points in my life. We can move down here and see at around 7 years of age, I went to church camp, and on the last day there was an altar call for kids to come forward who felt like they were supposed to be in ministry when they got older. I did not feel that, but halfway through the prayer, I heard God say that was supposed to be you up there. From that day forth, I lived my life in pursuit of being in ministry. When God spoke to me about this, my whole life changed directions, and I wanted to obey that call. I never gave up. And 27 years later, I started a ministry. Many times in my life, I tried to get into ministry. There has been a lot of different church plants, a lot of hurtful situations. I pastored a church that wrongfully terminated me. I've gone through the ringer in trying to be in ministry. It's been very hurtful and painful. But the thing is, a part of that story is I still feel called. I still feel drawn to be a witness, to love God, both vocationally, but also just as a Christian. And even though I have a lot of church hurt, a lot of things that happened from individuals that claim to be Christians, and we can encompass that in the church, I don't blame God. I don't blame the church. And I think a lot of Christians do that. And so part of my testimony, when I talk with people who had church hurt, I was like, yeah, I have church hurt, but I don't blame the church. I don't blame God. What I blame is that the thief comes to steal, kill, and destroy, and people have free will to obey God and to operate out of the fruit of the Spirit or out of wickedness. And so for me, that's one way I get to relate to people who have church hurt. I get to share my stories and testimony, but I make it about the goodness of God and how I reframed my thinking that it was the church. Oh, no, it's not the church. It's individuals who aren't operating within the spirit and love of Jesus Christ. So I'm able to separate that. And then when I talk to people who have a hard time going to church because they were wounded by someone, I'm able to communicate in a way that like, oh, I probably too should separate God and people and church from it being God who wounded me. Our stories are impactful. And so when you look at my timeline, I'll go back to it again here. You see, different lessons that I've learned through different periods of my life. Here's one. I had a dream that Steve Dinkle had a prophetic word for me, that it would be the last word that he gave me. He did have a word for me about doing ministry, that God would open the doors for it to happen, and all I had to do was step through it. That actually is a very impactful story because Steve was I would call him a mentor, but it was just unique because he would just randomly show up in my life. He was a pastor from my hometown that I grew up in who was never my pastor. But he would show up in my life at very critical moments where I had to make decisions and I didn't know what to do. And just through the Spirit of God, he'd just say, hey, Evan, I feel like God's telling me to tell you something. And it just really helped shape the direction of my life. This dream that I had was that Steve had a prophetic word for me, and that'd be the last word that he gave me. What I didn't know is that he had lung cancer and that he would die shortly after giving me that word. And so I called him that day that I got it. And I said, Steve, I had a weird dream that you had a prophetic word for me. And he's like, actually, Evan, I've had a prophetic word for you for a few years now, but I've never felt released to give it to you. But I guess now is the time. And so he gave me a prophetic word. And it was about that ministry is coming soon. And that came in 2022, 2021 time frame, and started a ministry shortly after that. But that brought so much life to me because the pain of not doing ministry hurt so greatly. And through the process, God prepared my heart that it would be the last word that he would give me, because he was preparing my heart for what would happen to Steve. And though I didn't know it at the time. And so I can reflect on God already speaking to my tender heart of caring for Steve and saying, hey, Evan, I'm just going to let you know what's coming down the road, even though I didn't understand it until after it happened. I could reflect back on a word from the Lord and say, God, you know what? Okay, this really stunk. But I trust you in this moment because I've heard you speak to me about this in the past. Sometimes the word of the Lord comes and we don't understand it. And then when it comes to fruition, we're like, oh, that is the word of the Lord. And we can trust God because he's already spoken to that situation previously. It's often like Mary and Joseph and baby Jesus when an angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph and told him to move his family to Egypt. But what was unique, before he moved to Egypt, he received the gifts of the wise men that helped them financially make that journey and sustain themselves while they were in Egypt. But before that moment ever happened, the wise men probably spent years coming to find Jesus. The blessing of the Lord was already on its way before the event happened. And oftentimes in our life, our stories and our testimonies are events that have happened in our life of the goodness of God before tragedy takes place. Or your testimony is an encouraging word to someone in their life that they get to hold on to that they don't know is going to be impactful, because then an event happened that was tragic or harmful or disappointing, or they brought disillusion into life, but because they heard your story, they were, okay, God has already brought me life into the situation because I've heard a story similar, and I can hold on to that promise, that story for myself to get me through. Like I held on to the story of the appendectomy of the lady who was in Africa getting one. Your story is important. Your life timeline is important. And something that I would really encourage you to do is, as you've created this life timeline, I would highly suggest looking at it and say, God, where at in here does healing need to take place? And then invite God into that moment of your life. There are many moments in my life where I say, God, I was 7 at this point, and though I was 7 and I couldn't understand what was happening, I couldn't internalize, I couldn't process, I couldn't see you, and I still carry hurt from that. Lord, now that I'm 36, take me back to being that 6 or 7-year-old boy and show me where you were in that moment. And he does. And he brings healing into those past wounds that I didn't know that still existed. God is a good God, and he's using your story to encourage others, to love others, and to shape the future hearts and minds of those that he's calling into the kingdom, and Christian brothers and sisters that he's wanting to encourage through your life. Thank you for watching this module. I feel like it was kind of intense, but I want you to know that your story is impactful and important, and you need to take the time to write it out. This isn't just a 30-minute process. This can take hours, days, and weeks to do. But rest on this moment. Give yourself the time to actually do this and to do it well. Because out of this comes the ability to understand and to craft and to share your story and testimony with others. May God bless you. God, I pray that you will recall stories and testimonies in their life that they've forgotten of both your goodness and things that you have walked them through. God, I pray that you will show them lessons that they had missed from stories in the past, and that you'll bring healing to areas that need healing, and that you're going to bring breakthrough in areas that they've been seeking breakthrough, that they've been needing breakthrough, when it just seemed that it would never happen. In Jesus' name, amen. Looking forward to seeing you in Module 3.